The snow was falling harder than usual that February night in 2006. Worcester, Massachusetts, felt like a city holding its breath, wrapped in that peculiar silence that only comes when winter blankets everything in white. But for 23-year-old Evelyn Sorrento, the snow meant nothing. She had places to be, people to see. She grabbed her keys from the kitchen counter, the little plastic keychain, catching the light, for just a moment, a small blue charm with reliable auto printed in faded yellow letters. She never made it home. 18 years, that's how long the silence stretched. 18 winters came and went, in Worcester, each one bringing fresh snow to cover the old wounds. Evelyn's mother, Maria, would stand at her kitchen window every February, watching the flakes fall, wondering if this would be the year someone would finally tell her what happened to her daughter. But cold cases have a way of staying cold in small cities. Evidence boxes get pushed to the back of storage rooms. Detective files grow thick with dust. The phone stops ringing, with tips. The media moves on to newer tragedies. And families like the Sorrentos learn to live with questions that seem to have no answer. Detective Ray Morrison knew all about those questions. He'd been working cold cases for the Worcester Police Department for 12 years, and Evelyn's file was one that haunted him. Not just because she was young, not just because she had her whole life ahead of her. There was something about the case that felt unfinished, like a song cut off in the middle, leaving you waiting for notes that never come. By 2024, Morrison was close to retirement. His hair had gone grey, his back ached from too many hours hunched over case files, and he'd seen enough heartbreak to last several lifetimes. But he had this idea, something that might seem crazy to the older generation of cops, but made perfect sense to someone who'd watched the world change around him. "What if we put this online?" he said to his partner one rainy Tuesday morning in March. "I mean really online, not just the police website that nobody looks at. Somewhere people actually go." His partner, Detective Lisa Chen, looked up from her computer screen. "Online how?" "Reddit," Morrison said, and he could see Chen trying not to smirk. "I'm serious. There's this whole community of people who love this stuff. Armchair detectives. True crime junkies. What if we gave them something real to work with?" It sounded ridiculous when he said it out loud. A veteran detective asking internet strangers for help solving murders. But Morrison had been reading about other departments that tried it. Sometimes, fresh eyes see things that tired ones miss. Sometimes the answer is sitting right there, waiting for the right person to recognize it. So that's how Worcester Cold Cases was born. Morrison spent his evenings learning how Reddit worked, how to post photos, how to write descriptions that would grab attention without compromising ongoing investigations. Chen thought he'd lost his mind, but she helped anyway. They started with 5 cases, including Evelyn. The post about Evelyn Sorrento went live on a Thursday night in April. Morrison had agonized over every word. Evelyn Sorrento, 23, disappeared February 14, 2006, Worcester, MA. Last seen leaving her apartment on Elm Street around 9 p.m. Her car was found 3 days later in a parking lot behind the old Woolworth building. Keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no leads that panned out. Here are some photos from her belongings, found in the car. If anything looks familiar, please reach out. He uploaded 12 photographs. Evelyn's purse, open to show the contents. Her wallet, with $23 still inside. A pack of gum, chapstick, and, there, among the everyday items that make up a life, a small blue keychain with yellow lettering, reliable auto. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. A few upvotes, a couple of comments expressing sympathy for the family, but no real leads. Morrison started to think Chen was right. Maybe this whole internet thing was just a waste of time. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning in early May, his phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had commented on the Evelyn post. The username was AutoNostalgia72, and the comment was simple but electric. "Holy shit, is that a reliable auto keychain?" My dad used to own that place. They closed in 2008, but I remember. Those keychains. Dad gave them out to customers, but only for a few months in 2006. Said they were too expensive to keep ordering. I've got a box of Dad's old business stuff in my basement. Might have records, if you're interested. Morrison stared at his phone screen, reading the comment over and over. His heart was doing something funny in his chest. That flutter you get when you realize something big is about to happen. He messaged Dure Auto Nostalgia, 72 immediately. The user's real name was Tommy Fitzgerald, and he lived about 30 minutes outside Worcester, in a small town called Charlton. His father, Patrick Fitzgerald, had run Reliable Auto from 1998 until 2008, when the economy tanked and he couldn't keep up with the big chain shops. Patrick had passed away in 2019, but Tommy still had boxes of his father's paperwork in his basement. Never threw any of it away, Tommy explained when Morrison called him that Sunday afternoon. Mom always said you never know when you might need old records for taxes or whatever. I've been meaning to clean out the basement for years, but you know how it is. Morrison knew exactly how it was. Sometimes the things we put off doing turn out to be the most important things we ever don't do. They arranged to meet at Tommy's house the next evening. Morrison drove out to Charlton with Chen, both of them trying not to get their hopes up. How many leads had they chased over the years? How many promising tips had led nowhere? Tommy's house was a small ranch with a neat yard and a basketball hoop in the driveway. He met them at the door, a guy in his 40s, with his father's kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. "Come on down," he said, leading them through the kitchen to narrow basement stairs. Fair warning, it's a bit of a mess down there. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from someone who never threw anything away. Boxes stacked on boxes, old furniture covered in dust sheets, the musty smell of time passing. But Tommy knew exactly where to look. Dad kept all his business records in these green filing cabinets, he said, pulling a flashlight from his pocket. Customer records, supply orders, employee stuff, tow logs, everything. Tow logs. Morrison felt that flutter again. Reliable Auto had done towing services. Of course they had. That's how most small garages stayed afloat, especially in the winter months when cars broke down and slid off icy roads. Tommy pulled out a thick binder labeled 2006 Towing in Patrick Fitzgerald's careful handwriting. Inside were carbon copy forms, the old-fashioned kind where you write on the top sheet and it transfers to the yellow copy underneath. Each form documented a tow job, date, time, customer name, pickup location, destination, reason for tow, employee signature. Morrison flipped through the pages, looking for February 14th, 2006. January, late January, early February, and there it was. February 14th. The form was filled out in sloppy handwriting. Clearly done in a hurry. Customer, name a pickup location. Elm Street, near Jamrodi, 47. Destination, storage lot. B reason, courtesy police request. Employee, D. Kowalski. Morrison's hands were shaking slightly as he held the form up to the light. Elm Street, near number 47. That was within 2 blocks of Evelyn's apartment. 11:47 p.m. on February 14th, just hours after she was last seen. "Tommy," Morrison said, his voice carefully controlled, "tell me about dear Kowalski." Tommy frowned, thinking, Danny Kowalski. He worked for Dad for maybe 2 years. Quiet guy, kinda kept to himself. Dad let him go sometime in 2007. I think, said he'd been unreliable. Chen leaned over Morrison's shoulder to look at the form. What's storage lot B? Dad rented space behind the old Woolworth building. Tommy said. Used it for cars that were waiting for parts, or when customers couldn't pay right away. But he gave up the lease in 2007 when business got tight. The old Woolworth building, where Evelyn's car was found 3 days later. Morrison felt pieces clicking together in his mind like tummen in a lock. A courtesy tow from Elm Street to the Woolworth lot. The same lot where Evelyn's car was discovered, and the tow was logged. just hours after she disappeared. Tommy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully, Morrison said. Did your father ever mention anything about this particular toe? Anything at all? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with the effort of remembering. You know, he said slowly, there was something. Maybe 6 months before Dad died, we were going through some of his old stuff, and he found that towing binder. He got real quiet when he saw it, and he said something like, some jobs you wish you'd never taken. When I asked him what he meant, he just shook his head and put the binder away. Morrison and Chen exchanged glances. They both knew that feeling, the weight of secrets that eat at you from the inside. The drive back to Worcester was quiet. Both detectives were lost in their own thoughts, processing what they'd found. A tow truck driver who had access to cars, who knew the backlots and storage areas, who could move a vehicle without anyone thinking twice about it. A man who'd been within blocks of Evelyn's apartment on the night she disappeared. But Danny Kowalski had been off the radar for 17 years. Finding someone who doesn't want to be found is one of the hardest parts of police work. People change their names, move to different states, live off the grid, they pay rent in cash, work jobs that don't require background checks, stay away from anything that might create a paper trail. But everyone leaves traces. You have to eat, you have to sleep somewhere. And if you're like most people, you have habits that are hard to break. Morrison started with the basics. Daniel Kowalski, born 1968 in Worcester. Last known address was a studio apartment on Vernon Street, vacated in August 2007, with no forwarding information. No credit history after 2007, no tax filings, no official employment records. It was like Danny Kowalski had simply vanished. Chen tried a different approach. People don't just disappear completely, she said, pulling up databases on her computer. They might go off the grid, but they usually keep some connection to their old life, family, friends, hobbies. She started digging into Kowalski's background, high school records, military service, 4 years in the army, honorable discharge in 1990, previous employers. And there, buried in an old arrest record from 1994, was a piece of gold. Emergency contact information. Emergency contact, Margaret Kowalski, sister, 40 Sear, 5555. The phone number was 18 years old, probably long disconnected. But Chen called it anyway, expecting to hear that familiar recording. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Instead, she heard ringing, and then a woman's voice, tired and cautious. Hello? Is this Margaret Kowalski? Who's asking? Chen identified herself as a Worcester police detective, and the silence that followed was so long, she wondered if the woman had hung up. This is about Danny, isn't it? Margaret finally said. They met at a coffee shop in Springfield, about an hour from Worcester. Margaret Kowalski was a small woman in her late 50s, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of worry lines that come from loving someone who makes bad choices. I haven't seen my brother in 10 years, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. But I know he's alive, because he calls every Christmas. Just to let me know he's okay. Where is he, Margaret? Morrison asked gently. I honestly don't know. He moves around a lot, different states, different jobs. He's been running from something for a long time. Chen leaned forward. Running from what? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like she might find answers there. Danny was always troubled, even as a kid. Our father, well, let's just say he wasn't a good man. Danny took the worst of it, being the oldest boy. When he came back from the army, he seemed better for a while. Steadier. But then something happened in 2006, and he just fell apart. What kind of something? Morrison asked. He started drinking heavy. Wouldn't sleep. Would call me at 3 a.m, crying, saying he'd done something terrible. But he'd never tell me what. Then one day, in 2007, he showed up at my door with a suitcase and said he had to leave town. Said if anyone came looking for him, I should say I hadn't heard from him. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. Margaret, this is important. Has Danny ever mentioned a Egan named Evelyn Sorrento? The coffee cup slipped from Margaret's hands, clattering against the saucer. Coffee splashed across the table, but she didn't seem to notice. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, I knew it. I've known it for 18 years." The story came out in pieces, interrupted by tears and long silences. Danny had called Margaret on February 15th, 2006, the day after Evelyn disappeared. He was drunk, barely coherent, talking about how he'd messed up bad and how she wasn't supposed to get hurt. I asked him what he was talking about, but he just kept saying, "It was an accident, Maggie. It was an accident," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought maybe he'd gotten in a car wreck or something. I never imagined. Did he ever give you any details about what happened?" Chen asked. Margaret nodded slowly. Over the years, bits and pieces would come out when he'd call. Usually when he'd been drinking. He said he was working that night, doing a tow job. Said there was a girl, and she was upset about her car breaking down. He offered to give her a ride, but something went wrong. He said it was an accident, that she fell or hit her head or something. And then he panicked. Morrison leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. A broken-down car on a cold February night. A young woman who needed help. A tow truck driver who offered assistance, but something went terribly wrong. "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. In all these years, has Danny ever mentioned where Evelyn is?" The woman's face crumpled. He said he buried her somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful. He said he visits her sometimes, to apologize. It was the first real lead they'd had in 18 years, but it still felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. Danny Kowalski could be anywhere, and Evelyn could be buried in any of 1,000 places between Massachusetts and wherever he'd ended up. But then, Chen had another idea. "Margaret, you said Danny calls every Christmas. Like clockwork. December 25th, usually around noon, and he moves around a lot, but he calls from wherever he is." "Yes, different area codes over the years. California, Arizona, Colorado. He says he likes the wide open spaces." Chen smiled for the first time in hours. "Margaret, when Danny calls this Christmas, I need you to keep him on the phone as long as possible. Can you do that?" It was May, which meant they had 7 months to prepare. 7 months to set up the trace, to coordinate with federal authorities, to get everything in place for one phone call that might finally bring Danny Kowalski home. But sometimes the universe has different timing than we expect. Margaret called Morrison on a Thursday afternoon in June, her voice tight with worry and something else, maybe hope. "He called," she said. "Danny called. It's not Christmas, but he called." Morrison grabbed a pen, his heart racing. "What did he say?" "He said he's been following the news. He said there's been talk online about that girl from Worcester, about Evelyn. He's scared, Detective Morrison, real scared." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The Reddit post. Someone had connected the dots between the online discussion and Danny's sister. Maybe Danny himself had seen the post. Or someone who knew him had. "Where is he, Margaret?" "Colorado. A little town called Creed. He says he's been working at a hunting lodge there, paying cash, using a different name. But he's ready to come home. He said he can't run anymore." Morrison looked at Chen, who was already reaching for her phone to start making arrangements. "Margaret, listen to me carefully. We're going to bring Danny home, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to call him back and tell him that if he wants this to go smoothly, he needs to surrender to the local sheriff in Creed. Can you do that?" She could, and she did. Sheriff Tom Bradley of Mineral County, Colorado, had been in law enforcement for 26 years. But he'd never had a call quite like the one he received from Worcester, Massachusetts, that Thursday evening. "You're telling me there's a man in my jurisdiction who's wanted for questioning in an 18-year-old missing person case?" Bradley said, his voice crackling over the long-distance connection. "That's right," Morrison replied. "And Sheriff, he's ready to turn himself in. His sister is going to call him tonight and tell him to come to your office tomorrow morning." Bradley was quiet for a moment. "This fellow have a history of violence?" "Not that we know of. We think this was an accident that got covered up. He's been running for nearly 2 decades, and I think he's just tired. Danny Kowalski walked into the Mineral County Sheriff's Office at 9:17 a.m. on Friday, June 14th. He was 56 years old, with grey hair and the weathered face of a man who'd spent too many years looking over his shoulder. He wore clean jeans and a flannel shirt, and he carried a small duffel bag that contained everything he owned. "I'm here to see Sheriff Bradley," he told the receptionist. "My name is Danny Kowalski, and I think some people in Massachusetts want to talk to me." Sheriff Bradley later told Morrison that he'd never seen someone look so relieved to be arrested. The extradition process took 3 weeks. Danny waived his right to fight it. He just wanted to go home and face whatever was waiting for him. During those 3 weeks, he spoke extensively with Colorado investigators, and slowly the whole story came out. February 14th, 2006, had started as a normal evening for Danny Kowalski. He was working the night shift for Reliable Auto, handling emergency towels and service calls. Around 11:30 p.m., he got a call about a car that had broken down on Elm Street, a young woman whose engine had overheated. When he arrived, he found Evelyn Sorrento standing beside her car, frustrated and cold. Her car was dead, and she needed to get home. Danny offered to tow the car to the lot behind the Woolworth building, where it would be safe until morning. He also offered to give her a ride home. It was a cold night, and it seemed like the decent thing to do. She got in the truck, and we started talking. Danny told the Colorado investigators, his voice barely above a whisper. She was nice, really nice. She was telling me about her job, about her family. And I hadn't talked to anyone in so long. I was lonely, you know? I thought maybe what happened next was the kind of split-second decision that ruins lives. Danny, emboldened by what he thought was a connection with this young woman, made a pass at her. When Evelyn firmly rejected him, something in Danny snapped. Not into violence, but into desperation. "I didn't want her to get out of the truck," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I wasn't going to hurt her. I swear to God. I wanted to keep talking. So I locked the doors and kept driving." Evelyn panicked. She started screaming, hitting the windows, demanding to be let out. Danny panicked too. He pulled into a deserted parking lot, trying to calm her down, trying to explain that he just wanted to talk. But Evelyn was terrified. She managed to get the passenger door open and tried to run. In the struggle, she fell and hit her head on the concrete parking barrier. "There was so much blood," Danny whispered. "And she wasn't moving. I checked for a pulse, but I couldn't find one. I didn't know what to do." What Danny did was make the worst decision of his life. Instead of calling for help, instead of trying to save her, he panicked completely. He put Evelyn's body in the back of his tow truck and drove to a remote area he knew from hunting trips, a wooded section near Quabbin Reservoir, about an hour from Worcester. "I buried her there," he said, "under a big oak tree. I said a prayer and told her I was sorry. I'd been saying sorry for 18 years. Danny provided detailed directions to the burial site, and on July 3, 2024, a team of Massachusetts State Police investigators and forensic experts made the drive to Quabbin Reservoir. They found exactly what Danny had described, a large oak tree in a clearing, about 50 yards from an old logging road. The ground around the tree had been disturbed years ago, and careful excavation revealed human remains, along with personal items that were quickly identified as belonging to Evelyn Sorrento. After 18 years of wondering, of hoping, of never quite giving up, the Sorrento family finally had their daughter back. Maria Sorrento was 68 years old when Detective Morrison called to tell her they'd found Evelyn. She listened to the news in complete silence, and when Morrison finished talking, she said just one thing. "Can I bring her home now?" The funeral was held on a warm Saturday in August, 18 years after Evelyn should have been laid to rest. The church was packed with family and friends, many of whom had never stopped wondering what happened to the bright young woman who simply disappeared one February night. Detective Morrison was there, along with Chen and several other officers who had worked the case over the years. Tommy Fitzgerald came too, the man whose basement full of old records had finally unlocked the mystery. Even Margaret Kowalski attended, sitting quietly in the back, carrying the guilt of secrets she'd kept for nearly 2 decades. The service was beautiful, and heartbreaking, full of memories of a life that was cut short by a moment of panic and poor judgment. Evelyn's friends talked about her laugh, her kindness, her dreams of traveling the world. Her mother spoke about a daughter who called every Sunday, who loved old movies and trying new restaurants, who would have been a wonderful mother herself. Evelyn didn't get to live the life she planned, Maria said, her voice steady despite her tears. But she's home now, and she's at peace, and that's something. Danny Kowalski pleaded guilty to manslaughter and improper disposal of human remains. At his sentencing hearing, he stood before the judge and the Sorrento family and spoke publicly about that night for the first and last time. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said, his voice cracking. "I was lonely and stupid, and I made the worst decision of my life. Not just taking Evelyn's life, but stealing 18 years from her family. 18 years of not knowing, of wondering, of hoping. I can't give those years back, and I can't bring Evelyn back. But I can finally tell the truth, and I can spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends." The judge sentenced him to 15 to 25 years in prison, with credit for the 18 years of self-imposed exile he'd already served. It wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough. But it was justice. After the sentencing, Detective Morrison walked out of the courthouse with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Not satisfaction. Exactly. You don't feel good about sending someone to prison, even when they deserve it. But completion. The sense that a long chapter had finally come to an end. His phone buzzed with another Reddit notification. The Worcester Cold Cases subreddit had grown to over 15,000 members in the months since Evelyn's case was solved. People from all over New England were posting about missing family members, unsolved murders, cases that had gone cold years or decades ago. And other police departments were taking notice. Departments in Springfield, Hartford, Providence, and Boston had started their own cold case subreddits. The Massachusetts State Police had launched a statewide crowdsourcing initiative. The idea that had seemed crazy 6 months ago was now being studied and replicated across the country. Morrison's latest post was about a 1998 missing person case from Framingham. A teenager named Kevin Walsh who disappeared after a house party and was never seen again. The post had been up for 2 weeks, and the comments were already generating leads. Sometimes the answer is sitting right there in front of you, waiting for the right person to recognize it. Sometimes it's buried in a basement, filed away in a box that nobody thought to look through. Sometimes it's carried around in someone's memory for years. A small detail that seems unimportant until it becomes the key to everything. The little blue keychain that Evelyn Sorrento carried that night in 2006 was just a cheap promotional item, probably worth about 50 cents. But it contained the thread that, when pulled, unraveled 18 years of mystery. UBO, Auto Nostalgia, 72, never expected his Sunday morning Reddit comment to help solve a murder. Tommy Fitzgerald was just a guy cleaning out his basement who happened to recognize a keychain from his father's old auto shop. But that's how justice works sometimes. Not through dramatic confrontations or brilliant detective work, but through ordinary people noticing ordinary things and deciding to speak up. On a quiet Sunday morning in October 2024, Detective Morrison was at his desk, scrolling through the latest comments on our Worcester cold cases, when he got a private message that made him smile. It was from UBO Eve Mom, 2006, and it was brief. "Detective Morrison, my name is Maria Sorrento. My daughter would have loved knowing that strangers on the internet helped bring her home. Thank you for not giving up on her." Morrison stared at the message for a long time, thinking about all the cases still waiting in those dusty boxes. All the families still wondering what happened to their loved ones. He thought about the power of human connection, about how technology that some people dismiss as impersonal and cold can actually bring people together in the most meaningful ways. He typed back a simple response. Miss Sorrento, Evelyn, would have been proud of the community that came together to help her. We'll keep fighting for the others. And they would. Because that's what you do when someone goes missing, when someone disappears into the dark spaces between one day and the next. You keep looking, you keep asking questions. You keep believing that somewhere, somehow, Someone knows something that might make the difference. The snow started falling early that year in Worcester, just like it had 18 years before. But this time, when Maria Sorrento looked out her kitchen window and watched the flakes settle on the ground, she didn't wonder where her daughter was. She knew Evelyn was home, finally and forever. And in the end, it was a community of strangers who had brought her there. People who cared enough to look at a photo of a keychain and remember where they'd seen it before. Justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes 18 years, a basement full of old records, and a group of amateur detectives who refuse to let a case stay cold. But when it comes, when that moment of recognition finally breaks through the silence, it feels like everything. The truth, after all this time, feels like everything.